everybody. Welcome. Good to have you here for this webinar. We are here for our monthly webinar for the Center of Addiction and Faith. We're really grateful you've joined us today. I'm Pastor Ed Treat. I'm the founder and the director of the Center of Addiction and Faith. Our mission here is to awaken faith communities to better understand and respond to addiction. It's a growing problem, and churches could play a huge role if they started doing some things. And we believe that vital role could do a lot, reduce crime, reduce homelessness, incarceration, many of the issues that are deeply tied to addiction. Today, we're excited to welcome our guest, Scott Gaetzke. Is that right, Scott? Did I say that right? I didn't double check with you.
Yeah, you got it.
Gaetzke, and then Mark Sanders. And they are from Great Lakes ATTC, and I'll let them explain what all that means. They're here today to talk about how faith communities can effectively respond to the addiction crisis, which is the mission of the Center of Addiction and Faith. So we're close partners. I'd like you all that are here today to introduce yourself in the chat by putting your name and location. It's fun to see where everybody's from. And then later in the hour, we'll have time for Q&A. So as you think of questions, please put them in the Q&A and they'll be lined up for us in order, and we'll address them later in the hour. Before we begin, before I turn it over to George, let's pause for a moment of silence to consider those who are struggling with addiction. We'll follow that with the Serenity Prayer. God grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, I'm pleased to introduce our webinar host and my friend, George Wood, the tattooed pastor. He is a survivor of many things and now serves as a minister, pastoral care counselor, recovery ministry founder, and author of the Uncovery and the Uncovery devotional. George is also host of his own podcast, The Sober Truth. So thanks, George, for hosting today. We're grateful for you.
Absolutely. It is wonderful to be back with everyone again and, sharing stories of, faith and recovery often involves professionals that along the way had helped us. And have you ever really thought about who helps them? Well, today we're going to be able to hear from Scott and Mark, as Pastor Ed said, as they talk about their work, because what they do is essentially help professionals in the mental health and behavioral health world with their technical needs and with all the different things that evolve around the work that they do. And they offer training and events, online learning, and special focus initiatives. And it is important that we realize that there's resources out there, because often in the work that many of us do in the day-to-day, we feel alone or isolated or like there's no one there to really lend a hand. And so Scott and Mark are going to share their, the story of what they do and the work that they do with us. And as they're doing that, please, as Pastor Ed mentioned, make a point to leave a comment or a question in the chat bar. So when we get done with the presentation, we can come back and ask them the different questions that may help us in the work that we do. And so with that, I am going to turn it over. They're going to share a little bit about who they are. But Scott and Mark, thank you so much for being with us today. We are excited to hear from you.
Thank you, George, very much. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I see we got folks from all over the country. That is really neat to see. As George mentioned, my name is Scott Gaetzke. I'm the state coordinator for Minnesota and Wisconsin for the Great Lakes ATTC. And I just want to take a couple minutes to tell you a little bit about the ATTC and our center, which is housed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then what we can offer all of you as the Addiction Technology Transfer Center. So the ATTC, Addiction Technology Transfer Center, is part of a national network that SAMHSA started over 25 years ago. And as George mentioned, our mission is to help develop and strengthen the specialized behavioral health workforce, specifically as it relates to prevention, treatment, and recovery services for substance use disorders. And one clarification I should make that's a little tricky about our name, the Addiction Technology Transfer Centers. A lot of folks think we're like a help desk for computers, and that's what technology means. What you need to do is replace technology with evidence-based practice. So SAMHSA has charged us to create trainings and webinars and resources that really help addiction treatment providers and the prevention and recovery field with those evidence-based practices that they can implement and carry out to fidelity within their programs. So we are located nationwide. So those of you who are joining us from outside of the Great Lakes region, which is our region that we cover, I know that you can connect with ATTCs in your area, and they will be able to provide similar resources as to what I'm sharing with you all today. Our center specifically covers the Great Lakes, which includes Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. A little about our center. So we are the Center for Enhancement System Studies, or CHESS, based at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and our founder, Dr. Dave Gustafson and Todd Molfenter, are industrial engineers. So we're based actually in the College of Engineering. And oftentimes we get kind of people looking at us sideways, like, how is it engineers are involved in substance use disorder treatment and recovery? Well, Dave and Todd have really devoted their careers to taking techniques and methodologies from industrial engineering around system management, change management, implementation science, and applying it to behavioral health. Dave was a pioneer in using technology to really help people who were dealing with chronic health illnesses. And Todd is an implementation expert, and through our NIATEX process improvement model, has helped thousands of organizations around the country improve their service delivery for clients and help with implementing evidence-based practices. So we've got a team of 6, of which Mark, my colleague, who you're going to hear from today, Mark's our coordinator for Illinois and Indiana, and also just an internationally renowned speaker. I think you'll really enjoy what he has to share today in his content. But how can the ATTC help you guys? Well, 2 of the things we have is, one, we put on a lot of webinars that are gain help with your knowledge building around certain topic areas in the SUD treatment and recovery area. We also do in-depth trainings, everything from motivational interviewing to treating SUDs with older adults, or screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatments, expert trainings, just a wide variety. And the best way to access all this is via our website. And I have the link at the bottom there. I'll also place it in the chat a little later in the webinar. All of our trainings, webinars are absolutely free. These are all due to SAMHSA funding. And so the other thing we have is many of those trainings are recorded and they become archive resources. So you can go to our website and we have a search feature, and any topic area that you may be interested in, you can search and gain access to toolkits and one-pagers and fact sheets around many topics. So I invite you all to take advantage of that. We also have a blog, the Counselor's Corner. Those of you that are doing counseling in your church who would be interested into more insight from addiction treatment counselors, this might be a good resource for you to connect with as well. And again, whether it's the training or archive resources or the blog, the best way to connect with us is we are on social media, but I recommend you just sign up for our mailing list and you'll get our monthly newsletter that will provide upcoming events and trainings. And then also, if you're in the Great Lakes region, in Minnesota, feel free to reach out to me directly if you have a technical assistance question or need. We're always happy to talk with you. Again, a little later, I will put a link in the chat that will take you directly to the sign up page if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter. I went really fast. Just any quick comment or question from the group? I don't know if you see anything, Katie. Otherwise, folks can think about it at the end. I know we're going to have a Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mark, and Mark will introduce himself and get started with our presentation for today. Thanks, Mark.
And thank you so much, Scott. And good morning to some and good afternoon for others. It's great to be with you. About 6 years ago, I was flying in from Arizona to Chicago, where I live. And on the plane next to me was a man who had earned 6 Purple Hearts. And how do you earn a Purple Heart? I'm glad you asked. Bravery. He was a 95-year-old World War II veteran. In other words, for 3.5 hours on this flight, I'm sitting next to the bravest human being I ever met in my life. And at one point he says, Mark, what do you do for a living? I told him I'm a speaker. I talk to therapists, counselors, case managers, doctors, nurses, the clergy, people who help others for a living. And he told me to tell you, thank you for your service. Thank you so much for your service. If you are joining us today, it means that you help others for a living, that every day you wake up, someone's life can be improved. Would you join me in releasing an emoji for those with us today who've dedicated their life to helping others? I don't know, a round of applause, a virtual round of applause, a heart, whatever you'd like to release. Yeah, because you're the best people in the world because you spend your life helping other people. So by way of introduction, I've been a certified alcohol and drug abuse counselor for 43 years. In other words, my entire life, I've worked with people that have alcohol and drug problems. And people ask me, what's my secret? And I always whisper for dramatic effect. My secret to this longevity is I collect recovery stories that inspire me. Here's such a story. Do you know actress Mary Tyler Moore? In the 1970s, there was a sitcom called The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Anyway, she went on to develop alcoholism and she went to treatment. And they were talking about God in the group. And Mary Tyler Moore said, there is no God. If you keep talking about God, I'm going to leave this facility. And they kept talking about God. Mary Tyler Moore jumped up and said, there is no God, left the facility, went into the nurse's station, and picked up a phone and called the airlines for a flight out of town. And the person at the airline says, you said your name is Mary Tyler Moore. Are you the actress? Mary Tyler Moore? Yeah, that's me. She said, I want to thank you so much because my husband heard that you were going to alcohol treatment and my husband just went to treatment. You might have saved my family's life. Thank you so very much. And Mary Tyler Moore hung up the phone, went back in the group room and said, you know, I think I just spoke to God. And she spent the rest of her life in recovery, helping people with their recovery. This is personal for me. My father died smoking crack cocaine, May 29, 1986. My father died smoking crack cocaine. A month later, my Uncle Isaac went in front of a judge one more time. He said, Your Honor, I don't go to prison this time. I want to go to drug treatment. The judge said, why should we put you in treatment? You've been committing crimes since you were juvenile. My uncle said, Your Honor, every crime I ever committed can be explained through untreated addiction. So the judge put my uncle in a recovery home that was run by a church. And they called my uncle's 13 brothers and sisters and invited them to participate in his therapy. And they said, we don't like him. He stole from all of us to buy heroin. The counselor called again. We don't like him. He stole from all of us to buy heroin. They called the third time. And this time the counselor said, we have food. They said, we'll be there. So all 13 of my uncle's siblings participated in his therapy. And they invited the 26 nieces and nephews. 39 of us participated. And he was the first person in our family to get in recovery. We now count 30 people in our family in recovery. You know what Native Americans told me to share with you? that what you do to help somebody with their recovery today will impact their family across 7 generations. We're on generation 4. And one of my Uncle Isaac's first acts in recovery was to go into public housing on the west side of Chicago. In Chicago, we call public housing the projects. So he went in the projects and he found his daughter, my cousin Yvette. And he said to my cousin, "You were the smartest girl in the world. The only problem you had, your father was using heroin, your mother was using heroin. I heard you dropped out of school. Please go back to school." And I brought you a picture of my cousin Yvette, my Uncle Isaac's daughter. And she went back to school. And she got a PhD. She's the only doctor in our family. I call her Dr. Cousin. And what she did after she finished graduate school, she wrote a book called Going from the Projects from Public Housing to a PhD. Now, I want you to look at this third photo. Do you notice the physical resemblance between my cousin Yvette and the young man standing in front of her? Same face, same smile, same tilt of the head. That's her son. He got a bachelor's degree that day at the same university where his mother's on the faculty with a PhD. And she said, "You know, Mark, my brother's overdosed and died, but none of my children have addictions. It skipped a generation. It started with one person. And we took it from there." So here's what we want to do. I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the history of churches involved in recovery in the United States, just a few moments. Then we'll talk about what churches are currently doing. And I understand that many of you are doing work as it pertains to recovery, but I want to share enough to get you to think, what else can we add to what we're currently doing? That's our plan. All right. There's a book called The Alcoholic Republic. And the author did some research that indicated that Americans drank more alcohol per capita the first 40 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence than any time in our nation's history. The years would be 1776 to 1806. They drank more alcohol per capita back then than we do now. And guess what? They didn't even have happy hour back then. They didn't have women can drink every Thursday night for 50 cents per drink. Why did they drink so much back then? 1776 to 1806. Would you put your response in chat? I'm curious what you think. Why did they drink so much back then? Why so much alcohol in 1776? Great to see you, Teresa. I know Dr. Karen is with you. What a glorious day. We have some of my colleagues from Illinois are with us today as well. Somebody's with us today from Nicaragua, right? Just they're a distance away. Welcome all. All right. Well, they had rationales why they drank so much back then. The British had all the tea. They didn't have bottled water in 1776, so water was impure. They did not have refrigeration in 1783, so milk spoiled easily. And Starbucks was so expensive in 1783, and still is. The reason they drank so much back then was because we were in a war, the American Revolutionary War, which was fought over taxation without representation. And when you have war, you have symptoms of PTSD. And how do people medicate PTSD? With the use of alcohol and other drugs. So following the war, the wives were concerned about how much alcohol their husbands were drinking. So the first lady, Martha Washington, was one of the leaders of the temperance movement. And by definition, the word temper means to cut down. So back then, wives would wake their husbands up on a Sunday morning and say, "Turn off that football game. Let's go to church." So one of our early interventions was in the church. And they would take their husbands to church and they would have them put their hand on the Bible in front of the congregation and make a pledge that they would either stop drinking whiskey or cut down from whiskey to beer. Do you think the temperance movement was successful? That was the pledge in front of the whole congregation. I'll cut down on my whiskey drinking, or I'll shift from whiskey to beer. It wasn't successful because they never addressed the trauma of war. So let me share with you one thing we need as we speak. As we speak, we need more churches that are trauma-informed. We need more trauma-informed congregations, my friends, because we're learning at the core of all addiction is trauma. We never address the trauma of war. My mentor, William White, wrote a book called Slaying the Dragon. The book is about the history of alcohol and drug use in the United States. He is the field's #1 historian. William White said, for the past 2 centuries, churches have been involved in substance use disorders challenges in America. You know who's been involved with that a lot for years? The Lutheran Church, who started Lutheran social services for well over a century. The Lutheran Church has been involved in helping people with their recovery. Same with the Catholic Church. You know who's been at it for a long time? Is the Salvation Army for several hundred years, long time. Then we have the 1930s. And there was a famous psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Carl Jung, who was friends with Bill W., the co-founder of AA. Did you know that Bill W. Not only was in recovery from alcoholism, but he was also depressed? And did you know that the psychiatrist Carl Jung was the one who talked to Bill W. about the spiritual principles of recovery? Back then, they called alcohol the spirits. In fact, they called it evil spirits because the people did some really terrible things when drunk. So Dr. Carl Jung said to Bill W., if you're asking people to give up the spirits, the alcohol, they have to replace it with something else, spirituality. Carl Jung had a reputation of helping people that were chronic in their alcohol use disorder, that alcoholism. So he was visited by a man by the name of Roland H., who had alcoholism kind of like my grandfather. Have you ever known someone who drinks alcohol so heavy, you can smell alcohol coming out of their pores? My grandfather was like that. Roland H. was really chronic in his alcoholism, and he met with Carl Jung. He said, can you help me? And Dr. Carl Jung said, we're not used to working with anyone as chronic as you, but there's a church called the Oxford Church. They can help you. And Roland said, do I have to go to England? He says, no, there's one in New York where you live. So Roland H. went to the Oxford Church, and they introduced him to 6 steps to maintain your recovery. I'll give you a few of them. Make amends to people that you've harmed. When you feel the urges to drink, reach out to another alcoholic. Get on your knees to pray to God that you'll never have another drink. Help other people. So Roland H. reached out to one of his old drinking buddies, a man by the name of Ebby, and shared those 6 steps with Ebby. Ebby then reached out to one of his grade school drinking buddies, a man by the name of Bill W., the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. He told him about the Oxford group. Pray to God you'll never take a drink again. Help other people. When in trouble, speak to another alcoholic. So Bill W. was in Akron, Ohio. He was craving alcohol. So he called the operator. I need to talk to an alcoholic. And the operator put Bill W. through to a woman by the name of Henrietta Siebling. Now, when I tell you this story, you're going to probably agree with me. There's something very spiritual about this. Henrietta Siebling was a volunteer at the Oxford Church. And Henrietta Siebling said to Bill W., I have the perfect alcoholic for you to talk to. By the way, the reason she volunteered at the church was because she was having marital difficulties and she wanted to stay away from her husband. I have the perfect alcoholic for you to talk to. She connected him with Dr. Bob. And that was a formation of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an incredible story about this flight attendant who developed alcoholism drinking those little bitty bottles of liquor they just serve on airplanes. Remember those small bottles of liquor? And her boss smelled alcohol on her breath. She almost lost her job as a flight attendant. She took a short flight from Las Vegas to the international airport in Los Angeles after she left drug treatment. She had an unbelievable urge to have a drink. And she was at Terminal 12 and saw all that liquor to her left. She ran over to the person holding the microphone to her right and asked, would you make an announcement? And the announcement was, will all the friends of Bill W. please report to Terminal 12. She said within 20 minutes, 20 people showed up from all over the world and said they were friends of Bill W. And they held a 20-person AA meeting right there at Terminal 12. Did you know that they estimate that there's 1 billion people worldwide that have benefited from 12-step groups all over the world? And think of what would have happened if Henrietta Siebling were not having marital difficulties, right? If she didn't happen to be there that day, Bill W. and Dr. Bob would never have met. It wouldn't have happened. Something spiritual about that. Carl Jung told Bill W., the word is synchronicity, how things line up for you when you're serious about your recovery. So I made that pilgrimage to Dr. Bob's house in Akron, Ohio. And he says, we who drink too much can be very slippery. So they took the Oxford 6 steps, which came right out of the church, right out of the Bible, and turned it into 12. 1986. I want you to think about what was happening in your life in 1986. That was the year that crack cocaine replaced marijuana as the #1 street drug. Let me explain what happened. In 1985, there was a well-known comedian by the name of Richard Pryor who was running down the street in Los Angeles. He was on fire. Do you remember what happened? He was freebasing cocaine. And when you freebase cocaine, ether is used. And ether is very flammable. He caught on fire. So in 1986, street scientists decided there needed to be a safer way to use cocaine, to smoke it. They took out the ether and they replaced it with baking soda. And that was the birth of crack. 1986. May 29th, 1986. My father was found dead in the closet that works back smoking crack cocaine. And 2 weeks later, there was a basketball player named Len Bias. And Len Bias, they said, was the second coming of Michael Jordan. To this day in barbershops, they still debate who was the better basketball player, Len Bias or Michael Jordan. Most people never heard of Len Bias. It's said that Len Bias jumped so high. If he went in the air on a Monday, when he landed, it was Tuesday. He was drafted #1 by the Boston Celtics. Someone is with us today from Boston. I saw your name. He was on the team with Larry Bird. And the day he was drafted #1 by the Boston Celtics, he went to a party and celebrated, snorted cocaine, had a heart attack, and he died. And you know how close the University of Maryland is to Washington, D.C., where Congress met. His death angered Congress, and they intensified the war on drugs. I want you to listen to what I'm sharing with you just for a moment, if you would. All right. In 1986, when Len Bias died, there were 400,000 inmates in our nation's prison. As they intensified the war on drugs, by 1996, there were 1 million people incarcerated in our nation's prisons. By 2006, 2.5 million people incarcerated. At the same time, my friends, at the same time that all these people went to prison around drugs, treatment disappeared. Because whenever the stigma of addiction increases, so does the stigma. So in large metropolitan cities like Chicago, in Harlem, in LA, African-American faith-based communities came together and they formed these ministries, these faith-based drug ministries. They all came together. Every denomination formed these drug ministries. The way it happened is people in recovery in the churches got together and convinced their pastor that we need to form a drug ministry because there's no treatment anymore for people who have addiction because the stigma increased following the death of Len Bias. And one of the most famous people connected to those faith-based drug ministries is a woman who performed with Prince. She called herself Vanity. And she developed during the years she was performing with Prince an addiction to cocaine. And she almost died. In fact, she went into a coma. And laying in a hospital bed, she said to God, if you let me make it through all of this, I'll spend the rest of my life never using drugs again and helping people with their recovery. And she got into recovery. And she would travel all to these big cities And she'd hold these huge revivals for recovery in African American communities. All these churches were united. It was unbelievable. But I was sharing with Pastor Ed what happened to that movement. And I'm going to whisper for dramatic effect. This is really important. It was an incredible movement across denominations, churches supporting recovery. And ultimately, denominational differences brought it to an end. So what am I suggesting to you? If you're from a small community that has a methamphetamine crisis, or say a suburban community that has an opioid epidemic crisis, ideally all the churches would come together and work together because they might offer complementary services. One church might have food, another church might have clothes, another church might do like job training and preparation. But if you bring them all together, there's a famous African proverb: spider webs, when united, can carry a lion. But the one way I learned that you can all come together as faith communities and work together is to make sure denominational differences don't divide you. George W. Bush was president of the United States and a man in long-term recovery. In fact, his pathway of recovery was the church. So as president of the United States, he made sure that there was money placed in faith-based communities providing services for people in recovery using a voucher system. His program was called Access to Recovery. A Catholic church in Chicago started a program called One Church, One Person Seeking Recovery. In other words, what if a church adopted people seeking recovery? He started another program called One Church, One Inmate. What if our church adopted people coming out of prison? One church, one school. What if we went into elementary school? Not necessarily to spread religion, but to mentor children so they won't start using drugs heavily at an early age. My sister was doing work for World Vision International in Africa. And she believed that drug addiction in Chicago is really a crisis like poverty in other countries. So she convinced World Vision to put some focus on addressing addiction in the United States. And as you know, Pastor Rick Warren from his church in Colorado started Celebrate Recovery, faith-based movement, and it's all over the United States. Every denomination across cultures. There's an organization that's called JACK. It stands for Jews who have alcoholism, chemical dependence, and significant others. They get together, the whole family, along with rabbis, to focus on recovery. It's what's called the Native American well-briety movement. Native Americans use the word of well-briety because they believe a person can be sober and not well. Do you agree with that, that a person can be sober and not well? Would you put a yes or no in chat? Can a person be sober and not well? I see some thumbs up. A person can be sober and not well. So let me let you in on a secret. Native Americans are developing the highest recovery rates in the United States. I'm going to repeat that again. Native Americans are developing the highest recovery rates in the United States. You know how they're doing it? Returning to their native traditions, their native religion, their native cultures. I'm going to share with you a story that inspires me. It's a story of Don Coyes from Wisconsin, Native American who entered recovery. But he felt pessimistic because most of his tribe was still drinking heavy and suicides were high on the reservation. So Don Coyes met with the elders and he asked the elders the question, what will be the signs that our people are ready to recover? And the elders told Don Coyes, there'll be two signs that our people are ready to recover. One sign is that a white buffalo will be born somewhere in the United States. And my friends, a month later, a white buffalo was born in Janesville, Wisconsin. The elders told Don Coyes the second sign that our people are ready to recover is that an eagle will land on the moon. Did you know that eagles are sacred to Native Americans? So I became curious, what's special about the eagle? I researched the eagle. My friends, Did you know that birds overall are more promiscuous than human beings? That 75% of birds have like half siblings? The eagle has one mate for life. And they soar. They don't hang on the ground with the buzzards. Are you all sitting down? The elders told Don Coyes that one sign that our people are ready to recover, an eagle will land on the moon. A month later, some of you all might remember this, there was an astronaut named Neil Armstrong that traveled in a spaceship, right, to the moon. And when he landed, what did he say? The eagle has landed. This faith-based movement has helped Native Americans, tribes, put together 56 and 70% recovery rates. There's a program that's called Muladi Islami, a Muslim group. They've integrated the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous with their religious practices. So I've interviewed a member of this group, and this is what he told me. He says, Muslims pray 5 times a day. And he asked me this question. If you took a shower 5 times a day, would you be clean? I said, of course, you'd be too clean 5 showers a day. He said, we pray 5 times a day to cleanse our spirit. And we've integrated Islam along with the 12 steps. So let me just ask you a question before I share with you what other churches are doing. What is your church currently doing to address substance use challenges? Feel free to take a moment and put your response in chat. And Katie said, this is very true what I'm saying, that there is some recovery on Native American reservations. So Denise is offering space for meetings. Fantastic, Denise. How about others? Celebrate recovery. Celebrate recovery is going to outlive us all, isn't it? Okay, we got hosting multiple 12-step different groups, Hope and Recovery group. Mental health, how about that? Conferences, hosting Ross meetings. Yes, Nisha Stringfellow, I know you. This is good stuff. Families recovery. Space for meetings, I see. Hosting family prevention. How about prevention? We're going to talk about that. Integrating faith and recovery and treatment. Let me share with you some other things people are doing out there. All right. So you mentioned it. Hosting groups like AA, NA, CA, Al-Anon, Nar-Anon. By the way, Nar-Anon is like Al-Anon for people who are using drugs besides alcohol. Housing for individuals seeking recovery. Partner correction facilities. Pastor Ed, you know one of my favorite programs is in Decatur, Illinois? And there's a prison there for women. And their children are able to stay with them up until age 2. It's significant because 1 out of 10 women who are in prison are pregnant. So here, child welfare doesn't have to take them away. The babies can stay with the mom. And all the churches across denominations, how about that, right? In Decatur, Illinois, have gotten together and they make sure that that woman leaves prison with a 2-year supply of clothes for her child. The church is making sure they get off to a good start. Community outreach. Can I share with you what one church asked me to do? Tell me if this was not a strange request, but the right request. It said, Mark, we wanted you to teach us how to do community outreach. We want you to give a training for us at midnight. Show up at midnight and teach us how to do outreach. I said, why midnight? Then I figured it out. You know, one day my wife and I took a trip to Hawaii, Honolulu, and there were we took a tour around the sugarcane fields, and they told us that they put lots of snakes in the sugarcane field to get rid of the mice, right? But it didn't work. They said because when the mice were awake, the snakes were asleep, and when the snakes were awake, the mice were asleep. And I thought about addictions treatment. When people who have addictions are awake, most drug counselors are asleep. A lot of people who use drugs are up at midnight, 1, 2, 3 in the morning. So they wanted to go out at night and do outreach when people who use drugs were actually awake. Do you know that one mega church, one big church, could take up one love offering every Sunday just for addictions treatment and finance all of addictions treatment in the town? Groups for children like me. Both of my grandfathers had alcoholism. My great-grandfather had alcoholism. If you were standing really close to me, you'd notice on the left side of my face, I have a little dot on my face. See that little dot on my face? I've had that dot on my face since I was 2 years old. My mother told me that one day when I was 2 years old, I was left in the care of my grandfather who went to the tavern, not the bar, but the tavern. Remember taverns? To get something to drink. He left me on the kitchen floor, and there was a bottle of Drano on the floor. My mother told me that I drank the Drano, and this little dot on my face was caused by my having drunk the Drano. I'm from one of those families that starts a story, but they rarely finish the story. So over the years, I've been left to fill in the blanks, George. So here's my fantasy, because they didn't tell me the whole story. I drank the Drano, and it was bubbling into my stomach. It was about to make its way into my face and leave dots all over my face, but the doctors pumped my stomach and saved my life so I could give this talk today. I've got a good friend I went to high school and college with. About 6 years ago, he said, Mark, we need to join the health club together. We're not getting any younger. In fact, we're old. Let's take care of our bodies. I said, are you kidding? My body's fine. You know, when I was 2 years old, I swallowed Drano. And the only time that I swallowed a Drano was this little dot on my face. He asked me $1 million question. He said, the dot is the only time you swallowed a Drano. He said, how do you know your body's not green inside? I took 2 steps back, said, I don't know, but what I do know is I've never been clogged up. There's the good news. I don't have any hair here. This is not a fashion statement. I didn't try to get these arts to impress you. One day when I was 6 years old, I was left in the care of my grandfather again. I tripped on the floor and I cut myself here. I was bleeding. I went to my grandfather's room to try to wake him up. I couldn't wake him up because he was under anesthesia, meaning what, he was drunk. And after about 20 minutes of trying to wake him up, I went in the bathroom, found the gauze and the Band-Aids, and I doctored myself up. I remember saying to myself at 6 years old, if I'm going to depend upon anybody for the rest of my life, it's going to be me. I'm the only one I can depend upon. You see, this story is called, We Didn't Get Enough Mothering Because Our Mother Didn't Get Enough Fathering. She was her father's favorite, but she was so intoxicated, he couldn't give her what she needed. So she put men ahead of her children. We felt abandoned. All of us started getting high at very early ages. What am I suggesting to you? My friends, my soul would breathe if, in addition to hosting AA meetings and NA meetings, that you also hosted a children's group. Because addiction runs in families across generations. Native Americans told me to share with you that what you do to help somebody today will impact their family across 7 generations. We're on generation 4. I don't have one niece or one nephew that has an addiction today. That's my commercial. Other churches are establishing church-based drug ministries. How about this? If you are a member or a pastor of a large church, say 3,000 members, I promise you, you have about 20 addictions professionals in your church, about 20 mental health professionals in your church, waiting for you to ask them to volunteer. So all of a sudden, now you have about 40 professionals in your church who are volunteering to provide services in the church. You could take the lead in forming a committee where you bringing the entire community together to work together. And my friends in Illinois, they can tell you how to do it. Right, Dr. Karen? They can tell you how to do it. How to bring a whole community together to work together to form a ministry, right? A recovery council to work together to promote recovery. So who do you bring to the table? People in recovery, the formerly incarcerated who turned their life around, Walmart, the local banker, the Chamber of Commerce, bring them all together to problem solve how we're going to address this problem in our county. Receiving individuals with substance use disorders with open arms. As Vanity said, Denise Matthews said, the Lord rejoices over the return of one lost soul. Harm reduction, Narcan distribution. My brother-in-law's church was watching the Bears play football on Sunday. He's a police officer. And one day he got a call that a man had overdosed outside and died. And my brother-in-law administered Narcan. And the man came back to life. And he called me and says, Mark, I thought only Jesus rose from the dead. I gave a man Narcan, he rose from the dead. He went to church that Sunday. support the grieving. Oh, my friends, if we did something special along with hosting children's groups, we provide some support for people whose loved ones overdosed and died as a result of their drug use. Looking into becoming a certified recovery support congregation. There's a model in Illinois and Tennessee how you can become a certified recovery support congregation. And our colleague in Illinois is giving me the okay to let you know. So if you have a cell phone, you could pull it out and just write down her email address. Her name is Nadia Klemkamp, and she's connected to our recovery-oriented systems of care council in Illinois. And she is giving me the okay for you to contact her and to talk about how do you become a certified congregation. So I just got 2 stories for you, then I'll turn it over to George. So after a decade after my father died smoking crack cocaine, my brother called me and said, I have a drug problem. I said, I know. He said, I need help. I said, I know. So I put my brother in detox for 3 days. He called me on the 3rd day, said, I'm bored, now what do I do? I said, go to a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. My brother attended his first NA meeting. He called me in tears and said, why are you crying? He said, after the speaker spoke at the meeting, I looked at the speaker and said, you spoke the truth. I was there. I remember you. The speaker was a man who used to use drugs and sell drugs with my father when my brother was a little boy. You spoke the truth. I was there. I remember you. Speaker said to my brother, you don't know this, but as soon as your dad died smoking crack cocaine, I got into recovery. There's a famous saying that some people die so other people can live. And you certainly don't know this. When I was out there selling drugs with your dad, he saved my life twice. He said, so I often ask God, why did you save me? He said to my brother, maybe one of the reasons that God saved me is so that I can help you. My brother's in long-term recovery. He's on purpose. You see, what I've learned is that recovery is a miracle. You see, my friends, I wasn't around when Jesus walked on the water on the Sea of Galilee or when the Red Sea parted for Moses. I didn't witness those miracles, but I've seen people with addictions come back from the dead. What a miracle. Here's the final story, and I'll turn it over to George. My mentor's mentor was dying. And he called my mentor and said, would you fly from Florida to Kalamazoo, Michigan? I'm sitting near my bedside. Tell me, write one more article before I die. My mentor got on the plane. He flew from Florida to Kalamazoo, Michigan. He's sitting at his mentor's bedside. Said, listen, I love you, but this is really strange. Why are you writing this article on your deathbed? You've written 400 articles. You revolutionized substance use disorders treatment through your pen. Why are you writing this article on your deathbed? His mentor quoted the philosopher who said that each of us dies twice. He said, the first time you die is a physical death. They'll have a funeral for you. And the next time you die is the last time someone on earth speaks your name. And I want to say to you, those of you with us today, if you continue to help others with their recovery, there'll be people speaking your name for a long time. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Mark. I'm a huge, fan of the history of addiction myself. And I thought I knew a lot, but you shared some things that I'd never heard. I have to ask, have you read Johann Hari's Chasing the Scream?
Yes.
Yes, he was a speaker at the conference 2 years ago for the center, and he's got to meet him. He's amazing man.
The way he approaches everything, George, he gets on planes. In the era of Zoom, he gets on planes. So
Yeah.
he know more about his own substance use disorder. So let me just share this with the group. One of the things he said in the book is that the opposite of addiction is not recovery, it's connections. My faith-based friends, if we can help people seeking recovery feel a sense of connection, then we truly help to accelerate rates of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was really amazing presentation. Have you found the 7 generations to be true from the Native Americans?
Well, let me tell you about Don Coyes, who told me to share that with you.
Yeah.
All right. So this is his story. He had 8 children, 7 are in recovery, and he has 22 grandchildren in recovery. Now, my family, since my dad died on generation 4, I don't have a niece or a nephew that has an active addiction. None.
Wow.
And if you think what we're doing in the Canada, there's a First Nation tribe in Canada called the Alkali Lake Tribe in British Columbia, Canada. They went from 100% alcoholism to 95% recovery. And check this out, George. They've maintained a 95% recovery rate for 4 decades.
Wow.
4 decades. Here's what they did. They came to the United States to learn about AA, and they brought AA to the reservation as something tribal about AA. And then they reinstated their tribal religion. And every time someone went to treatment, they would fix up their house. The whole tribe would paint their house, give them new furniture with the belief that you feel better leaving treatment if you came home to a newer looking house.
Mm-hmm.
But more important, what they've been doing is healing a historical trauma. And I promise you a day will come when we'll have more and more churches, because people trust their church, that are going to be trauma informed. I'll give you an observation of something, George. On any given Sunday, say in African American communities, if I were opening a restaurant in the African American community, I would open, if I can only open one day, it would be Sunday after church. Because there's a lot of singing, dancing, and shouting. So I figured it out. Singing, dancing, and shouting removes trauma from the body, right? And so church serves that focus, right? It's to help people deal with what's inside of them that's leading them to drink and use other drugs. So that's what I love to see, along with more work around drugs and alcohol, is to do a lot of work around trauma as well.
Well, yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it with the singing and dancing. I mean, the somatic connection between trauma and the body is something that we have not even fully tapped into yet. I'm also a huge advocate of the, research into trauma. What do you recommend? You've mentioned it multiple times now about church leaders becoming more trauma informed. Where would you begin that process, or what could you recommend for people on this call?
And somebody just chatted that they actually are doing that, but there's some, I'd recommend it. And what I'll do is I'll send some resources to Ed, but there's actually groups out there that train faith-based communities on becoming more trauma informed. So I'll make sure that I put something that Pastor Ed can get his hands on that he can send to everyone else. But it begins with that real formal training, and then informally just really welcoming people and making newcomers feel a sense of welcome.
Just a quick question on that. Do you find, now I know Bessel van der Kolk in his book, he talks about how even he's not a fan of the term trauma informed, because so many things become trauma informed, then we really miss out on what actually is trauma. Do you see that being an issue with some of the training and things that are out there?
There's so many different approaches, right? But here's what we found, George, is that you can train 20 people in the same approach, and some people will get better results than others. You can train 20 churches in working with people that have substance use challenges, and some churches will get better results than others. It comes down to 3 or 4 factors. Empathy, possessing a certain amount of warmth when you help people, and warmth is of the heart. Genuineness, along with a deeply held belief in the capacity of people to change and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Faith. If we welcome people with open arms, have empathy, warmth, and genuineness, and deeply believe, then that same model in the hands of such individuals will be much more effective. So what we found is that no matter what training you get in trauma-informed care, they're about equal in their effectiveness, but some programs are more effective than others. And it comes down to who's working with the model.
That's really good. A couple questions here from the people out there. Dr. Tina Parkman asked, he's basically making a comment. In Detroit, 75% of the church population is traumatized even after spiritual abuse from some of the churches.
Yes.
Yeah.
At some point, that we'll adjust that more too, because some people do have traumatic experiences within their church experience. In fact, there was years ago, there was a fellow that talked about how to help people work through that. His name was Father Leo Booth, helping people who were traumatized through their church experience.
Okay. We do have a question from Adrian Neely. Do you feel that Native Americans suffer from post-traumatic disorder due to being forced from their land?
All of the above. In fact, let me share something with the group. So I mentioned that group out of Canada that went from 100% alcoholism to 95% recovery, and they've maintained it for 40 years. It dipped beneath 95% during COVID-19. And they found out they still had some work to do from that era where their children were placed in boarding schools. As a matter of fact, I was involved in some healing circles with Native Americans during COVID-19. And it hit some of the tribes really hard. And it reminded them of the stories that were shared by their ancestors when they were separated from the reservation and placed in boarding schools. So you bet. As a matter of fact, George, let me just go and say this. I can't even see anyone but George right now. And I bet my left wrist that all of you are historical trauma survivors. Example, if your ancestors came to the United States via Ellis Island at the turn of the century, they were either escaping World War I, World War II, poverty, Hitler, religious persecution, prison. We all come from trauma. And so it's a recognition of that as to how important it is to begin to heal it.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. I had a couple questions on here from a few different people about CEUs from the different trainings that you do. Are they available?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Scott. Scott can talk about that and also lead us into that next step. And just can I say one more thing to the group, George?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, yeah, okay. All right. Once a month, I encourage you all to walk through the world with your head held high. They're going to say, look at her head held high. Isn't she clergy? Why is her head held up high? And look at him with his head held up high. Does he think he's God's gift to the world? And my answer is that you are. You've been given the gift of compassion for other people. You're using those gifts to make the world a better place. I turn it over. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So George, to answer the question about CEUs, most of our trainings, we give you a certificate of participation, and then you're able to submit that to your certification board in your state. It differs between all the states, so we can't have a CEU that's one size fits all. So that's how we handle it. The website link that I put to our ATTC website, you can also access the national website through there for ATTCs and connect with your region. And they also have an online, it's called Healthy Knowledge, where there's online courses that for a very small cost, you can take an online course and get CEUs. So those of you interested in that, that's another resource. And then finally, if you all would, before you leave the webinar today, because all of our training and informational webinars like this and what Mark presented today is free of charge, the only thing SAMHSA asks of us is they want to know what you all think of these resources that they are funding. So if you wouldn't mind the GIPRA survey, you can either point your phone at this QR code, or I will put in the chat a link that'll take you right to the survey. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes. And if you're willing to complete that, we'd be very grateful. So thank you. And now, George, I can turn it back to you or Ed.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to both of you gentlemen, that this has been just a really informative seminar. I love hearing just the history and then also about the work that you're doing, because you're right, that with technical in the name, I think people go right away to thinking you're like a computer online help desk. So it's really great to know that there's more things out there, that the support that you're giving is in more impactful ways. So
thank you for all that you do, and Pastor Ed too.
Yeah, absolutely. Pastor Ed, you want to take it?
Yeah, I tell you, that was outstanding, Mark and Scott. That was just so, people are requesting a transcript because there's so much information you gave us. And this will be recorded and available on our website in a couple days. And you probably will get, I think this was set up, but I can't guarantee you that a follow-up email will come with a link for a video on demand so you can rewatch it. If you want a transcript, you can rewatch it and put on your automatic what do you call the artificial AI
AI.
note taker. So that'll take
Yeah.
the transcript for you. But I want to say thank you, Mark. Your stories are just riveting, and I feel like I could sit and listen at your feet all day.
Yeah.
You're a gifted man, and I appreciate your time here today.
Thank you.
This has been excellent. It exactly makes the case for the work that we're doing. So thank you, and bless you. Thank you all for coming today. We're over our time by a minute so far, so a good turnout here. Over 100 folks for the over 200 registered, but over 100 showed up. So your message got out, and we just believe that this is going to have an impact and do some amazing things. What else do I want to tell you before I go? A couple of announcements. We have next month our webinar will be featuring Pastor Seth Perry, and he will discuss addiction and mental health and how you can reduce stigma around these issues in your faith community to help those who are suffering. And I think that's all my announcements for now. Just that, we have an app that will link you to all of our webinars, to all of our podcasts, to all of our resources. And it is chock full of resources. And it's at, go to your app store, go to Center of Addiction and Faith, and it's free. All the resources are free. We're committed to offering these things for free because the people who need them most probably can't pay for them. And some of you can. So if you can pay, we could use your help. We are a nonprofit, and we're constantly struggling for resources. So anything you can do to help us out is greatly appreciated. That's all I have. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being here. Thank you to our host, George, and to our guests, Scott and Mark. Bless your work and keep it up. Go in peace. Keep reaching out to those who still suffer, and God bless you.
See everyone.